So, is it right for a minister of the gospel to comment on moral, cultural, political issues? Thanks for joining us today on The Line of Fire. Everyone watching our live stream, you see we are audio only today. Everyone listening, as always, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown, thanks so much for joining us on today's broadcast. So much is happening in our country. We are in absolute turmoil. You've heard me say many times that it's my goal to be your voice of moral sanity and spiritual clarity in the midst of a society in chaos and a church all too often in compromise. You look around, you think, okay, I know what you're talking about. We're being torn apart in every way. The Kavanaugh hearings have shaken the nation. These next elections, these midterm elections, as volatile as any as I can remember in midterm elections. And the question is, what is God saying in the midst of all this? What is the church doing in the midst of all this? What is our role? What in the world is going on? How do we respond? By God's grace, every time we are here on the radio, every time we're putting out new articles and videos, our goal is to equip you. Our goal is to strengthen you. Our goal is to help give you clarity. And in fact, to even be a place of spiritual refuge where you can come away from the craziness of the hour, get your head clear, and then go back out into this sinful world and make a difference. I have solicited some questions on the state of the church, on the Trump presidency, on the Kavanaugh hearings from Twitter and Facebook. I'm going to be taking those today. You say, oh, but you took Twitter and Facebook questions on Friday. Yeah, well, we'll do our best to open the phones extra on Tuesday and Wednesday. And then we've got some special broadcasts coming away Thursday, Friday, and Monday. And all of our friends in London, England, I'll be speaking, God willing, excuse me, at a special apologetics conference, the church and culture and Jewish background, all day Saturday in London, and then Sunday preaching twice in London. It's all on our itinerary at AskDrBrown.org. One other thing, before I address the question of the role of gospel ministers in society, addressing the culture, before I talk about that and even explain why I'm talking about it, I just want to refer you to some of my recent articles. I've got a brand new one up that addresses the very issues we're talking about today. You'll find it on thestream.org. And then I wrote a couple of articles, one of them on Thursday night after the hearings with a real sense of burden and urgency. The article's on many websites. It's really taken off. It's getting shared a lot. What is shouting to us from the Kavanaugh hearings. So check that out on our website, AskDrBrown.org. And then also, I think you'll find really interesting an article on some sadly ironic words and forgotten words from the Clarence Thomas hearings. And I looked back at the hearings and the Anita Hill testimony and all of that. Many of you remember those. And the parallels between those hearings and the Kavanaugh hearings and Professor Ford's testimony and so on are amazing. I wrote down about 15 different parallels, some very obvious, some I was surprised to see as I dug in. And then some of the things that Clarence Thomas had to say, including what he went through was a horrific experience and beyond what he expected. He was expecting people actually try to kill him, but he wasn't expecting to get slammed the way he got slammed and the allegations against him. Bottom line is that he said, look, if I had to go through it so no one else will have to afterwards, then so be it. Well, sadly, that's not what happened. So I think you'll find those articles to be of real help. So why do I even raise the question about excuse me, why I address cultural and political issues and moral and social issues? You might say it's self-evident, it's good, it's important, it's necessary. But others will say, and it's a very small minority, but I respect the opinion, look, you're a preacher of the gospel. Leave that to others. Leave that to the political pundits. Leave that to the news commentators. Leave that to the journalists. You just preach the gospel. I appreciate that, and I understand that. And because I respect the question, and because preaching the gospel is something I've been doing since 1973 at the age of 18, I mean formal preaching and just one-on-one preaching since the days I got saved in the late 1971, 16 years old. But I feel it's a fair question, and I think if I address it, you'll be helped to have better understanding where the church fits in, where we all fit in the culture. Now, to be candid, we receive floods of appreciation, floods of thank yous from people face to face and via email and social media and other means, thanking us for speaking up and speaking out. And we have the affirmation of heaven, a deep sense of that from the Lord. But still, I want to honor this question and respond to it. So let me start at the most obvious. And I'll give you 10 reasons why I address cultural and political issues. Number one, God called me to. God called me to. As surely as he called me to preach, he called me to do these things. He laid his hand on me and called me to preach. He sent me to many nations, many times. He's called me to reach out to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He's called me to teach at and lead ministry schools and send out laborers to the nations. He's called me to help spark revival in the church. He's called me to do academic research in Bible and theology. And he's called me to be your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. He called me to be on talk radio. He called me to write columns that appear on conservative websites and political websites, as well as on Christian websites. You say, how do I know he called me? Well, you walk with the Lord, and when he grips you, when he burdens you, when he speaks to you, when something stays in your heart and it burns, and the more you walk with the Lord, the more it burns, and the more that he moves on you to speak these things, and the more fruit you see, you know it's a calling. It's not a matter of just intellectual speculation or wondering and maybe. No, it's a matter of knowing. It's a matter of knowing, and it burns deeply in my heart. And look, bottom line is, I'm not trying to please anyone but the Lord. I'm trying to serve you. I'm trying to be a blessing to you and a help to you and a strength to you. And for those of you who listen, who differ with me, hopefully give you something to think about. But my goal is to please the Lord. My whole goal is obedience to the Master, obedience to the one who gave his blood for me. So in that respect, I'm called to do this. And many things in my life, I saw myself doing before they happened. You know what I'm saying? You ever picture yourself doing, you just know you're going to do something? You know, maybe some of you got married when you first met someone. You just knew, I'm going to marry that person. You saw yourself with them, and it wasn't some flaky thing. It's 20, 30 years later, and it was the Lord. Or maybe, you know, you're watching someone preach to large crowds and gathered on streets of inner cities, and you just have this sense, I'm going to be doing that one day. It's not ambition. It's not ego. It's a sense of knowing. Well, that's exactly what happened to me years ago. I'd be looking at some of these different websites, and I just see I'm going to be writing on these websites. And I'd hear certain people on talk radio, and I'm going to be on talk radio. So I'm here in obedience to the Lord as long as he wants me doing these things. Okay, second reason that I address moral, cultural, and spiritual issues, and why others are called to as well. Spiritual issues, obviously, but I mean as they intersect with the moral world, the cultural world, the political world. So number two, it's a question, why should believers have to look to the world for moral and social guidance? In other words, we all live in this world. We all have to deal with social issues on a regular basis. Most of us are involved in some kind of political discussion. Most of us also vote. And who among us doesn't have an opinion, probably a strong opinion, about President Trump? So here's my question. Why then should Bible believers, followers of Jesus, why should we have to rely, let's say you're a conservative, why should you have to rely exclusively on Fox News or Rush Limbaugh or Laura Ingraham or Mark Levin or others, many with great insight and brilliance? And why have to just rely on them? Or if you're on the liberal left side of things, you know, CNN and Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and whatever other voices, you know, Tom Hartman on radio, other liberal voices, why should we just have to rely on the world? Why can't there be men and women of God, servants of the Lord, ministers of the gospel, who seek to bring insight, who seek to bring a biblical perspective, who seek to say, hey, great, we'll learn from all the news and all the commentators and all the pundits that we can. I certainly do. And I learn from critics as well as from people I agree with. Certainly, absolutely. However, why should we only have to go to them? Why are we forbidden to comment on those things and speak on those things and address those things? All right, and number three, before I go to some of the questions that you posted, there are hundreds of thousands of others already preaching and teaching in our congregations. There is no shortage of preachers and teachers in America. There is no shortage of gospel-themed books and TV shows and podcasts and blogs. Not all of them have sufficient depth or in sufficient harmony with Scripture. We'd all agree on that. But certainly there's no dearth, there's no famine of preaching and teaching and Bible-based curricula and things like that. So why does every single gospel preacher have to be consigned to the pulpit alone? Can't we have a pulpit to the world? And not only for evangelism? Can't we be called to speak to the culture as well? Number four, if you want to go through this in written form, go to stream.org and you'll see it as either my most recent article or second most recent. You say, how do you do that? I'm always there on that homepage. Just click on my name and you'll see the recent articles come up. Okay, so number four, we rightly resist the false separation of church and state. We rightly resist the false separation of church and state. So how often does the world say to us, stay out of politics? You Christian leaders, stay out of politics. Keep your hands off our culture. Remember the separation of church and state. So how do we respond? We say, no. What our founders intended was to keep the state out of the church, not the church out of the state. Our founders did not want there to be a state religion, and our founders did not want the state to have the ability to coerce the religious people, religious beliefs, the church, and others. All right? So that's a right response. Yet the moment some of us seek to bring the truths of Scripture into society and into politics, others in the church say, you're mixing politics with religion. Stay with the gospel. So it's kind of an odd thing, isn't it? On the one hand, we protest the wrong notion of separation of church and state. We say, no, it's not freedom from religion, it's freedom of religion. And then when we seek to speak, when we seek to address these things, when we seek to cross over from the world of the church to bring the message of the church and the perspective of the church into the state, we're told that we're mingling politics with religion. This is from within the church. It's odd. Now, you say, isn't politics a different animal? On a certain level it is, but because politics intersects with culture, morality, society, that's why I comment on those things as well. Otherwise, I have no interest in politics. I comment on these things because of their intersection with very important areas of our lives. All right, I'm going to give you the rest of the reasons on the other side of the break, and then I want to comment on the FBI investigation, my thoughts on that, and take your questions that have been posted on Twitter and on Facebook. We're just getting started today on the Line of Fire. Welcome back, friends, to the Line of Fire. Michael Brown here. My profound joy to have the privilege of speaking to you by radio and by internet and podcast and whatever other ways we can. By the way, I posted a couple of things about our new book coming out October 23rd. Donald Trump is not my savior. An evangelical leader speaks his mind about the man he supports as president. And a lot of people just see the title and think it's a Trump-bashing book. Maybe they think back to the primaries when I was so opposed to Donald Trump's candidacy. Maybe they haven't followed things along the line over the last few years. I'm not quite sure. But I find it very interesting that there's discussion and controversy over the book and hasn't come out yet, and then some over the cover. It's really, you've seen it in person, the paperback and the hardcover, it just really beautiful. I mean, both Nancy and I are amazed, and my team is amazed at what a beautifully produced book it is. But the fact of the matter is, one reason I felt this urgency to get the book out now was to help people realize, okay, Donald Trump is our president, not our savior. Our savior gets our life. Our president gets our vote. And if we have things in different categories, then our whole reputation doesn't need to rise and fall on the president. And your salvations are going to be judged on how you vote for the president. It's going to be, what did you do with Jesus? So if we could get things in the right categories and understand politics is not the gospel and the kingdom of God transcends patriotism, and just understand things rightly, then we get out and vote with enthusiasm and excitement, and vote for the principles that matter to us most, and vote for the positions that matter to us most, and don't get all caught up on certain personalities and things like that, as if Donald Trump is our savior. He's not as our president. So listen, I want to see many of his campaign promises come to pass. They're important to me also. All right? They're important to many believers. And many things that he's done have been in harmony with that. Other things he's done disturb us and so on. Fine. We put them in different categories and we vote accordingly. So anyway, you can still pre-order a signed numbered copy. On Saturday, I was in the office signing and numbering the first 75 or 80 pre-ordered books, just with joy and praying over the books as I was doing it. Or you can just, if you want to get the paperback or the e-book, pre-order on Amazon. And then listen, once you get the book and get into it, if you enjoy it, if it's a blessing to you, be ready to post a review on Amazon as soon as it comes out, because there's probably going to be a lot of controversy over it, and which is great, let it be, but some people are just bash to bash. So if the book is a blessing to you, go ahead, October 23rd, that'll be your time to post your review. Okay, back to my reasons for why I speak out on moral and cultural issues. Let me review. Number one, because God called me to do it. Number two, there's no reason that believers should just have to look to the world for moral and social guidance. Number three, there are hundreds of thousands of others already preaching and teaching in our congregations. Number four, we rightly resist the false separation of church and state. Number five, our ministry is literally flooded with questions about moral issues, with more requests for help than we can answer. My administrator recently told me that the vast majority of notes of appreciation we receive, the vast majority of requests for help we receive, relate to moral and cultural issues. We didn't ask for this. We didn't seek it out. This came to us by way of calling. And by God's grace, all to his glory, the fruit speaks for itself. And I jotted down, I looked down my list of countries that I've been to over the years and how many times to different countries and so on. I was looking at that and asking myself, okay, how many of these countries within the last few years, while I was in the country, or specifically going to that country, asked me, can I please come and address moral and cultural issues, in particular LGBT issues? Well, across America, of course, then Canada, Peru, England, Germany, Italy, Hungary, Faroe Islands, Netherlands, Singapore, South Korea, India, the Philippines, Australia, and in some cases meeting with government leaders in those countries. So obviously, this is something we're called to do. And then whenever I'm asked to address, say, LGBT issues in a public setting, there's a line of people waiting to talk to me, many times with tears, wanting to tell us about what happened with their child or spouse, or how do I minister to this longtime friend, and so on. These are unavoidable issues. Let's address them. And by God's grace, it's something he has enabled us to do. Number six, this is part of our prophetic calling. Aren't we called to be like the sons of Issachar? 1 Chronicles 12:32. They understood the times and knew what Israel should do. Aren't we called as God's people, especially ministers of the gospel, to hear God's voice? Jesus said, his sheep hear his voice. As many as are led by the Spirit, they are the sons of God. These are things that Paul has written as well. The Word of God speaks to us and speaks to issues. The Holy Spirit speaks to us. Aren't we supposed to hear God's voice and share that with the world? Look, a lot of us believe that God's judging America. We believe God's judging America for sin, or God's taken his hand of blessing off us in certain ways because of sin. So how is it that we're not supposed to address the nation concerning those sins? And how is it we're not to help equip the body to deal with those issues and those sins? And how is it we're not to provide a way of redemption and restoration? That means speaking to the world around us, right? Number seven, again, answering the question why I personally address moral, cultural, political issues along with spiritual issues. It's part of being salt and light. So as salt, we provide a moral conscience to the society, and we help preserve the society. And as light, we expose darkness and we show the way. So we will be hated and maligned and persecuted for this. Jesus told us that. But it's part of our calling. And if you go through the Word and see the role that we play, holding forth the Word of life and shining the light in dark places, that also exposes sin. And that also intersects with culture. Okay, number 8, I can address moral, cultural, and political issues and continue to preach and teach and take the gospel to the nations and reach out to my Jewish people. By God's grace, I'm continuing to do all of that. We've added a Wednesday night outreach broadcast for New York City and then online around the world called Real Messiah. We have a major project to get one of my key books out in Hebrew in Israel for mass distribution there, or to distribute, I should say, to as many as possible. I'm continuing to go to the nations, God willing, London this next weekend, and then after that, another trip to India later in the year, God willing, my 26th trip to India. And then this year I've been in Italy, and this year I've been in England already, and this year I've been in Israel, and traveling all around America and preaching and speaking at conferences and doing debates and doing apologetics and answering your questions on the radio and so on. So I can do all that and still write articles on moral and cultural issues. I can do all that and still put out books like Donald Trump is Not My Savior and do radio shows like this. Number 9, the Bible addresses these issues. The Bible addresses the issues surrounding us. In the days of slavery or segregation in America, did the Bible have something to say about it? How about today? Does God's Word have anything to say about abortion, about human trafficking, about corrupt politics, about LGBT activism? Just if you just preach through the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, you'd end up dealing with these issues. And according to a George Barna poll, while about 90% of preachers, having acknowledged, yes, the Bible addresses the moral and cultural issues of the day, about 90% of them said, but we don't use the Bible to address them. When asked why, major reasons were fear of losing people, fear of losing money, fear of losing influence, that kind of thing, diminishing programs. But according to another Barna survey, something like 90% of the people surveyed, the congregants said, we want our pastors to address these issues. And then number 10, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, if you're old enough, they need answers. This is the world they're living in, friends. I got a text a few days ago from a pastor in England. I'd been there just a couple of months ago. And he said, since you came to speak at our church, over a dozen folks have come to Christ. And it's a smaller congregation, so that's a really neat number to hear. And this Sunday, we had our full sex change person come in. I think he meant to say our first full sex change person come in. He said, we want to stand for truth and be full of grace and truth. And he asked me, do we have a policy statement that I could help him with that would be useful and applicable so the church can formulate certain things? Well, look, it's not only pastors and congregants dealing with questions like this, but our children and their children as well. So every day or all the time, they're confronted with confusing messages on TV and online, at school, on the job, among their friends. And if we don't have answers for them, friends, they'll get their answers somewhere else. So I've mentioned this before, but a pastor of a substantial church and congregation, one of the pastoral staff members there told me that none of his adult children or older teens, adult children, none of his kids agreed with his position on homosexuality, even though they're raised in the faith. So in this area, it seems the culture impacted them more than the great upbringing that they had. So you now have an increasingly common phenomenon of drag queens reading to toddlers in libraries. Kindergartners get sent mixed messages on gender. Teenage stars on reality TV are taking you on a journey through sex change surgery they've had. Videos that are watched hundreds of millions of times or even billions of times on YouTube are proclaiming a different gospel. So do we just sit by? Do we sit by and say nothing? Do we let our kids figure it out on their own? You say, well, that's for the parents to deal with. Well, who's going to help the parents deal with them? Not every parent has the time to research the issues. Not every parent is equipped to come up with answers. There are plenty of things I need to go to others. I need to look to other specialists, to lawyers or to psychologists or to experts in other religions that I'm not as familiar with and things like that. So absolutely, we need to, at least some of us need to help the body deal with these issues, and at least some of us need to speak to the world about them. Welcome, friends, to our Monday broadcast here on The Line of Fire. Michael Brown, truly delighted to be with you. We are audio only, which of course does not affect all of you listening, but if you're watching, you don't get to see my smiling face, but just picture it. You can hear the smile in my voice. So glad to be with you. All right, I decided over the weekend to say, listen, on Twitter, on Facebook, where so many of you follow me, and if you don't, connect with me on Facebook, Ask Dr. Brown, that's ASKDR Brown, or on Twitter, Dr. Michael L. Brown. So there are two L's in the middle there. DR as in Dr. Dr. Michael L. Brown on Twitter. And also on YouTube, if you don't subscribe there, we're nearing our first 50,000 subscribers, so why not get us right near that number? That's also Ask Dr. Brown, ASKDR Brown on YouTube. Anyway, I asked folks on social media, okay, what questions do you have about the Kavanaugh hearings? What questions do you have about the Trump presidency, about the state of America, the state of the church in America? And I want to answer some of those really good questions that were posted over the weekend, and then do my best to open the phones extra tomorrow and Wednesday as well. Okay, I wasn't asked this question directly, but it's come up, which is my thoughts on the president ordering the FBI investigation of Justice Kavanaugh and the charges against him. Now, interestingly, I had posted a question on Twitter and Facebook saying, what if the FBI could do an investigation? It could be done within a week. Would you be in favor of it? And overwhelmingly, about 75%, both on Facebook and Twitter, said no, we wouldn't want it, to stall tactics and so on. And my feeling was it doesn't need to be done. The FBI could have investigated if they thought there was merit to it. The man's been investigated 6 times already. Enough witnesses have given sworn testimony. I don't see a reason for it. The longer you delay things, the more of a mess it becomes. Those were my thoughts. Interestingly, when Senator Jeff Flake said, okay, I'm voting to send Justice Kavanaugh's, to send him over to the full Senate for a vote, he said, but I'm insisting that there be an FBI, I'm requesting that there be an FBI investigation taking no longer than a week. I thought that's funny. That was my number, and one of my friends said, well, the Republicans are going to have to do it now that this thing is out. I saw Alan Dershowitz, who's been very pro-Trump in many ways, despite his liberal political leanings, that he was saying you have to have an investigation. There's no reason not to. So here's how I feel about it. I don't like it in that I don't think it's necessary. All right, and say with the Anita Hill hearings, Anita Hill accusations, during the Clarence Thomas hearings, those took 3 days. The FBI investigation took 3 days for that, and came up with nothing conclusive to support the allegation. So White House said there's nothing to it and moved on. But I think now that's going to happen, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because the ones that are going to vote against Kavanaugh are voting against him no matter what. He could come out the squeakiest, cleanest guy in the world, they're going to vote against him. And now they'll say that his temperament during the hearings was not good, etc. They're going to vote against him anyway. But at least it'll take the bite out, and it'll enable the Republicans that want to vote for him, and maybe a couple of Democrats that feel they need to vote for him, to confirm him. And if he's guilty, well, then let the whole thing flesh out. So I didn't like it in terms of the delay, the tactics behind it. But now that it's happening, I'm glad, and I'm glad that President Trump asked for it. So again, if it was before these hearings, I would have said, don't have them just go ahead and vote. There's no need for it because I don't expect them to come up with anything. But now that it's going to happen, hey, we welcome it and let the truth come to light. Okay, let's go to some of your Twitter questions. Kyle, wow, do you have all the answers, doctor? I have some. If you ask me the right questions, I got the answers. And if not, we'll look for them together. Let's see here. Okay, this is from WAI. What happens to the Trump agenda if the Democrats take the Senate and the House? Man, you're going to have battleground. I don't claim to have some special prophetic insight. I think it's just self-evident. You are going to have battle. I don't believe or expect that he'll back down, that he'll just try to compromise, because as I understand him, that would be a sign of weakness, and I feel he'd be more belligerent and maybe and perhaps turn it into a 2-year campaign for the 2020 elections and try to make them look bad and they're getting in the way, etc. So some things might get through, but you might have battles over every Supreme Court nominee that nobody gets through, and a real quagmire. So you might have a 2-year mess leading up to the 2020 elections. Those are my thoughts. I don't claim prophetic insight. I think some of this was self-evident in terms of what I'm saying. All right, this is Truck Girl. Do you think the volatility of politics is worse than it was 200 years ago, or is it that there is much more exposure and involvement? All right, if you go back to some of the early campaigns for president in the late 1700s, there's some pretty vile stuff being exchanged. There is some pretty ugly insults being exchanged. There's no doubt about that. That was definitely happening. But I don't think that we had the level of division through the country along so many different lines. I think we were more united about many things, and then the candidates had those that loved them and those that hated them. Obviously, if you go to the time of the Civil War, our divisions cost us the lives of hundreds of thousands. Our divisions literally almost tore the nation apart, and you had states seceding from the Union and things like that. So yeah, a massive division in the mid-1800s. But I believe now we're more divided more deeply on more issues than any time in my lifetime, for sure. That's number one. And number two, now that everybody can express themselves on social media, now that the ugliest voices can come up and be heard in every way, now that there's so much attention getting to be the one that's got the answer, so you got something to say now, you got to say it in some dramatic way. I think our divisions are explodingly deep and very, very dangerous. Fionn, is it possible for unity in Judeo-Christian faiths to become the return to faith that leads the world, Jerusalem taking back the hub of leadership from the Vatican? I don't believe that's going to happen before Jesus returns in a real way. If it does happen before then, I would say it would lead to an Antichrist type religion, or it would lead to some type of false world faith or some false unity. I don't see that happening out of Jerusalem until Jesus returns. I see many within the church recognizing the importance of recognizing Jewish roots. I see God raising up leaders in Jerusalem like in other nations that can serve the body. But I see, according to end-time prophecy, massive controversy over Jerusalem at the end of the age, the nations of the world being drawn in by the Lord to battle against Jerusalem at the end of the age, and with that, many coming to faith around the world and many falling away. Eric, do I see Trump stepping out of the spotlight and handing the reins off to Pence in the future? Not unless he has some debilitating sickness, realizes he can't serve anymore. I think he thinks he's made for this. He gave himself, a couple months back, he was asked how he felt about how he was doing as president. He gave himself an A+. I think he loves, as much as he hates the Russia probe and the negative media, I think he loves a fight. And he is the most, look, there's no hiding his ego, right? And he is, in the natural, the most powerful man on the planet. So I don't see him stepping back from anything unless he's just unable to lead. Sean, how does the church best point people to Jesus? How do we best influence the society at large for Christendom? Well, number one, we live the life. We live it out. We're not hypocrites. We are sincere believers. We are godly. We have godly families. We treat our spouses and children in honorable ways. As single people, we keep our witness in the world. We're good fellow workers. We're good employees. We're good bosses. And we have a pattern of good works, that our works match our faith. That when you look in a city, who's on the front lines of helping the addicts and the homeless, and who's on the front lines of feeding the poor, and who's on the front lines of providing educational programs in the inner cities, and who's on the front lines of helping rescue people from human trafficking and so on. Should be us. I don't mean no one else is doing it, but we should be leading the way. And then our words, preaching the gospel, telling people about Jesus, seeking to lift him up without shame and using wisdom and love, and then praying. And where we can be voices in other ways to speak with wisdom and to influence the culture, we do. But these are primary ways that we do it. Okay, Edgar, do you think that Trump ordered an FBI investigation to drain the swamp once and for all? No, I don't think so. Number one, I don't think this will have anything to do with, quote, draining the swamp. Number two, I think it was pragmatic. I think he realized if he wants to get Kavanaugh through, he's got to do this. And his hope was probably that he's going to come out clean and that he could bash the Democrats all the more. So that would be my understanding as to why he did it. Let's see. Devin, Dr. Brown, I've noticed in the American church, from my experience, many treat church as a place they're just supposed to go to once a week, see friends, sing popular worship songs, hear relevant message, while then the rest of the week God is the last thing on their minds, etc. It's a 3-tweet long tweet, but just for time's sake, let me interact and say this. Number one, my book Revolution in the Church discusses these very things and says the church is not a building, that it's not going to church. So, we gather in buildings and we worship the Lord and we sing and pray and hear messages, but it's not so much going to church, it's being the church. It's living out the message in the society. It's taking the message into a lost and dying world. And yes, there are many shallow converts. God knows their sincerity. And there are false converts. And we do have a gospel in America that often bypasses the cross. As I've often described it, the American gospel is, this is who I am, this is how I feel, and God is here to please me. Whereas the biblical gospel is, this is who God is, this is how he feels, and we're here to please him. Books of mine like The End of the American Gospel Enterprise and How Saved Are We address these very issues with real passion. Quite a few of my older books really majored on those things, and my book Saving a Sick America deals with this to some extent as well. So by all means, we need a major wake-up call in the Church of America. If we had it, America would look very different, would look radically, dramatically different. So yes, my biggest concern, as I've said over and again for years, is not so much the presence of darkness, it is the absence of light. All right, we come back. I'm turning to your Facebook questions on culture, politics today. All right, thanks so much for joining us today. The first half hour of the broadcast, which many of you catch, some of you only get the second half hour, I addressed why we talk about moral, cultural, political issues as ministers of the gospel, why I do it. If you missed that, you can get the entire broadcast archived on our website, AskDrBrown.org, in the digital library. It's free and available to you. And you can also read the article that's up on the stream, where I go through the 10 points that I covered on the radio as well. Let me get back to your questions about the Kavanaugh hearings, about what's happening in America today. Let's see. Theology51 asks on Twitter, do you think it would be acceptable to approve Kavanaugh if he was guilty but owned up to it? Can someone who commits a crime that serious be put in leadership? I don't think he's guilty, but I was concerned by a tweet in which you seemed to insinuate the age of crimes matters. Okay, if he did that many years ago and admitted to it many years ago, and he totally reformed his ways and was a totally different man after that, yeah, I believe he could sit on the Supreme Court. If it was something that just a few people knew about, that never came to public record, He was confronted with it now, and he said, yeah, it's absolutely true. That happened. I'm ashamed of it, and it is true. I've dealt with it. It's not part of my life and hasn't been for 35 years. I have multiple witnesses on every front that can attest to it, but it did happen. I would still say, fine, that kind of sin, even that crime, could be forgiven and you move on. But if he owned up to it now, after saying it never happened emphatically, no, then I couldn't trust the man. Under no circumstances could I say that he would be fit to sit on the Supreme Court. Plus, he would have perjured himself. So there's no way he could. Rational libertarian. How can you work in state and federal government and still be a Christian? Jesus tells us that in order to follow him, we must not resist our oppressors and turn the other cheek. But in order to win in politics, we have to punch back. This is how Donald Trump got elected. How do we reconcile the two? Okay, number one, Jesus is talking to us in terms of personal vengeance, retaliation, and things like that. And this is also how we overcome evil. We overcome evil with good, with love. It doesn't mean that we don't rebuke. It doesn't mean that we don't stand. It doesn't mean that we don't hold our ground. It just means that we don't fight the way the world fights. There have been many fine Christian leaders who have made it to the highest level of politics in America and other countries. And there are many fine people serving within the government. And we know that according to Romans 13, the role of the government is to do good, that authority comes from God, that it is to oppose evil and support good. So of course Christians can be involved. They just can't lose their testimony in the process. So yeah, it's challenging, but I believe you can fight and be strong without being nasty, without being carnal. Now, things have really degenerated in ways, say, to run for major office. That's very difficult. But if God is with you, he can bless you for doing what's righteous. And look, Mike Huckabee became the governor of Arkansas, and I didn't follow the campaigns then, but I don't think that he got nasty the way others would get nasty and resorted to vile insults and the like. So yeah, for sure, you can. But like many other professions, it's a challenge to maintain your testimony. All right, let's go over to questions that were posted on Facebook, and I'm going to go through these rapidly to get to as many as possible. David, is the Trump presidency and its isolationist policy, America First, playing a role in biblical prophecy, for example? Number one, I don't believe it's an isolationist policy. We're active in many nations and seeking to make a difference in many nations, but America First is the right policy. Every nation should put its own interest first. I'm talking about what the government should do, all right? Believers, we serve and we help others, but if America's not strong, we can't be a blessing to the rest of the world or be a positive influence on the rest of the world. So I don't have a problem with America First if you mean it the right way. Is Mexico's policy Mexico third? Is Canada's policy Canada second? Is Israel's policy Israel fourth? Is any nation on the planet that says everybody else first? No. There's a globalist mentality that I don't agree with, but I don't see us as being isolationist. As far as specifically fulfilling biblical prophecy, not to my knowledge. Another David. Why at a time when so much biblical prophecy is literally being fulfilled on a daily basis, is the church in America so apathetic and asleep towards this reality? I can't tell you how many other Christians think I'm being sensational when I talk about Russia, Iranian, Turkish alliance as a precursor to Ezekiel's war. I believe we're witnessing the great falling away from the faith as predicted in the last days. Hey, David, I really respect that, and I appreciate you looking at the Bible and taking these things seriously. I would just say, though, that decades ago, I heard a totally different explanation about Gog and Magog, or Gog and Magog, in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And in late 1960s, we were told all the prophecies had fallen into place, and this was it, and Jesus was coming any moment. So I think you have to realize that many have kind of been there and done that. But we're living in urgent days, and the fact that so many believers are asleep, look, that happened in New Testament times with Laodicea and Sardis and other churches in different cities. So this has been an issue through the ages, but it's a major issue in America and Europe today. Shirlene, barring a miraculous move of God, do you see any path to turning things around in this country? No. absolutely not. Now you expand on the reason for your question, but no, absolutely not. Barring a miraculous move of God, I don't see any way for the country to be turned around. Now, God forbid it happens, we could have a massive collapse. We could have massive calamity. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. And out of the depths, we cry out to God. But still, sometimes people, even in the depths, curse God rather than cry out to him. But priority, a massive move of God. Ricardo, to what degree is the American church to cooperate with political issues, and to what point should we hold back? To the extent that we can follow Jesus in good conscience and support certain political agendas, we do. To the extent that the policies of the government want us to violate our convictions, then we don't. So in other words, we have our lives to live, and where we can live our lives supporting the government and honoring the government as it does its job, great. Where the government comes in conflict with our fundamental beliefs and convictions, then we have to go against what the government is calling us to do or to be. John, is the United States of America mentioned in the book of Revelation? No, not specifically. Some claim America is the great Babylon. Some claim the Catholic Church is the great Babylon. Some claim it's a world system. Some claim it's Islam. So you have this kind of speculation, but is it mentioned specifically in the book of Revelation? No. Victor, do I think Brett is guilty? No, I don't. I personally don't. I believe Dr. Ford as well. I give them both the benefit of the doubt. I believe she did have a trauma and was abused, but I'm not sure that her recollections are accurate. I do believe Brett Kavanaugh's passionate denial is real and true. Is it possible he got drunk and forgot what happened? Could be. But I just have to say one of them is remembering wrong. I don't assume either of them are lying. I don't think he's guilty, but I'm not saying she's lying. I just leave it as a question mark that I don't have an answer for. Tony, American politics is scary to me. The Democrats and the left-wing media have thrown off all guys and are revealed for what they are. The stakes are bigger than ever. He goes on. Where is the line in preaching free speech, which is non-negotiable, and taking serious, even legal action against corporations and mega media companies that are, as President Trump says, actually an enemy of the people, a concerned Australian? I would not go along with the president there in saying that the media is the enemy of the people. I'd say some in the media are really hurting our country, and on all sides. More so on the left these days, but on all sides, some are hurting more than helping. But this is one of our rights. This is foundational, freedom of speech. And unless it crosses certain lines, we're going to have it for better or for worse, and we need to have it. Louise, these hearings, or more accurately, this witch hunt for Kavanaugh, is dividing our country and making us look as if we have no control of our own political issues. This is a smokescreen from Satan to divide us and pull us away from God. And the Bible tells us this will get worse. As an American church, we have to take our eyes off the political arena and keep our eyes on Jesus. It's so hard to do when all we hear on TV and social media and even our own friends is this stuff. What do you suggest is the best strategy to keep our focus on God? Yeah, all these were great questions. Thank you so much for posting these. Okay, number one, we do what we always do. We put him first. We seek him first. We prioritize time in prayer, time in the Word, worship. Number two, we may just decide to take a total fast from any following of the news or interaction on social media that drags us in, and go cold turkey for a while, and then only reincorporate what we find healthy in our lives. Number three, we can really meet with the Lord and say, Lord, give us your perspective. This is what I do and part of my calling. And then hopefully people like me and others, we can help you come with sobriety and clarity and be a witness in the midst of this. All this being said, my brothers and sisters in Jesus, whether you voted for Donald Trump or you voted for Barack Obama, whether you identify as Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, or something else, whether you believe Professor Ford is telling the truth or Justice Kavanaugh is telling the truth, regardless of where you stand, if you are a truly born-again follower of Jesus, I appeal to you, may our differences be less conspicuous than our areas of harmony. May our union in Jesus be more powerful than the things that divide us. May we put first things first and major on the majors and come together as one to impact this lost and dying world. And may we recognize if the church doesn't bring unity and the church doesn't bring healing of our wounds, no one will, nothing will. Hey friends, if you appreciate our ministry, please be in prayer for us. Share what we're doing with others, and as you're led to help and you're able, your support means the world to us. You can stand with us by going to AskDrBrown.org. All right, be with us tomorrow for another special broadcast here on The Line of Fire.